from Matthew 14, verse 22 to 33. Jesus walks on the water. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up onto a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
Thanks again for that reading, Zach, and boys and girls this morning. I have some water with me. You can see it in this bowl here. And I've got some other things. I can't promise that it'll be as exciting as Catherine's experiment last week was, but here goes. The things that I've got with me to go along with this water, some of them will float and some of them will sink. And I'm going to ask you, when I show you these things, whether you think they're going to float or going to sink. Now, if you're really fast, you could maybe put your answer in on YouTube chat as you're listening. Younger people, you'll work it out much quicker than any of the rest of us, how you would do that. But it's when I put the item into the water, I suppose that's when we'll find out whether you're right or whether you're wrong about whether it's going to float or not. So are you ready for the first thing I have to put in the water? The first thing I have is a lollipop stick. A wooden lollipop stick. So the question is it going to float or is it going to sink? When I put it into the water, what do you think will happen? I hope you've got your answers in. Let's try it and see what happens. I'm sure you got it right. It's made of wood, and there you are. It floats on the top of the water. Let me see what else I've got here. Here I've got a metal spoon. Now don't be fooled, boats are made out of metal and they float, don't they? So don't be put off by the fact it's metal. But this metal spoon, what do you think? Is it going to float or is it going to sink? What's your answer? Let's put it in and see if you got it right. Oh, straight to the bottom. I'm sure you got that as well. Let me see what else I've got. I've got a piece of kitchen foil. It's metal as well, isn't it? So, will it float or will it sink? Let's see what happens. You got your answer? Float or sink? Oh, there it is. It's floating. I don't think it's just because the wood's underneath it. It still floats right on top of the water. And one last thing I've got. It's a piece of kitchen foil, exactly the same as the last one, but tell you what, I'm going to scrumple it up into a little ball. Will it float or will it sink? What do you think? Float or sink? When I put it in, there you are, it floats. Whether it's in a tight ball or spread out flat. Not sure if that surprised you or not, but it's floating on the top of the water. Well, I've got another question for you actually. Lollipop stick, metal spoon, tin foil. What about you? Now, I'm not going to throw you into a bucket of water, don't worry. But I wonder, do you float or sink? I think we can find the answer in the Bible as to whether we will float or sink, or what will help us to float instead of sinking. Zach read for us about how Jesus, after he'd fed 5,000, told his disciples to get into their boat and to go across to the other side of the lake. And while he went up into the mountain to pray, the disciples did that. And as they were crossing the lake, we're told that the wind became very strong and the waves became very large, and they were afraid. They thought the boat was going to sink and they were going to drown. And then they looked out across the water, and what did they see? They saw Jesus coming towards them, and he was walking on the water. And when Peter saw it was Jesus, he became excited and he said, "Lord, if it's really you, let me walk on the water towards you." And Jesus said to Peter, "Come." And because he knew it was Jesus, Peter had no fear. His fear was overcome, and he climbed out of the boat and he started to walk on the water towards Jesus. But as he did that, he began to look around him. And he took his eyes off Jesus, and what he saw was the wind and the waves, and he became afraid and he started to sink. And he cried out to Jesus. He said, "Help me, save me." And Jesus reached out to Peter and rescued him. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to walk on the water. He was able to float, not sink. But when he took his eyes off Jesus, he began to sink. Do you know, as we go through life, there are all kinds of storms, and we can encounter some pretty rough water. I suppose this time of lockdown and the virus is a time like that. But the thing is this, boys and girls, that as long as we remember that Jesus is there, and as long as we keep our eyes on him, as long as we put our trust in him, then he will help us every day to live for him. It's when we take our eyes off Jesus, when we put our confidence just in ourselves or just in others, that we'll sink. And the thing is this, those times when we feel we're sinking, if we cry out to Jesus, he will reach out to us. He will help us. He will save us. He will indeed be with us and make sure that we float and don't sink. This week, boys and girls and everyone who's listening, keep your eyes on Jesus. Then we can be bold and we can be strong, and we can remember that as Jesus is with us, we can walk by faith, not by sight. Let's take a moment to pray together. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, when the storms of life come against us in these days of lockdown, when we miss our friends and our family and even school, just pray for each boy and girl who's listening today, when so many things are so different, that you would indeed help each of us to keep our eyes on Jesus, to keep trusting in him, to know his help and his strength every day. So that in all the storms of life and all the difficulties that come our way, we'd be able to float and not sink. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Our children's hymn this morning encourages us to be bold, to be strong, because God is with us. Do follow Cara and Jenna, who are going to lead us in doing the actions as we sing. Be bold, be strong.